Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. The man who would have killed your love when that love was all you had, in Jacob Morrissey's opinion, was not a very good man. It's even worse if that person was your wife, the person who should have loved you more than anyone else, a man who knew you better than anyone else, the person who saw you at your most vulnerable moments, the man who found a way into your heart, into your bones, into your blood, into your soul. It's funny how much there is in common between all-consuming love and cancer. Jacob came to the conclusion that some types of love, like cancer, are benign. Others are malignant. His wife fell into the category of malignant, and like cancer, she had to be cut out and destroyed. And Jacob knew how to do it. It was so perfect that he was sure even she would appreciate the way it was destroyed. And such a great ending. Jacob looked over the workbench, out the window, at the garden outside. It was filled with colors. The garden of her English cottage. The one she spent so much time creating and planting. The one she loved so much. Her pride and joy. But she abandoned him too. For her, it would be like coming home. Yes, Jacob decided. It was poetic. Jacob stared at the blank canvas for a long time, brush in hand, waiting. I was waiting for it. It was hard to describe. It was a rush, a longing, a tingling in the fingertips, a flutter in the stomach, a longing in the soul, and a need in the gut. It was a clear vision in his mind that guided his hand. There was no art without it. Jacob slowly made a 360 turn, taking in the four walls of his studio, each of which was lined with blank canvases. They leaned over him casually, like regulars sitting with glasses of wine in their hands at one of the premieres. But unlike the careless collectors, there were preparatory sketches pinned to them, each of which accused him, prompting him to start. What? He shouted at them. I'm waiting for it, just like you. If you want to attack someone, attack it. Jacob frowned and dropped the brush. She rolled across the floor, stopping only at one of the censuring canvases. Unable to withstand his anger, he threw the palette on the floor. She fell face down on the floor with a crash. Still not calming down, he kicked her, enjoying the colorful stain she had left on the wooden floor. It was the most creative thing he had achieved in recent months. Then Jacob did what he had been doing every day since it left him. He went for a walk. He was walking along a long, familiar tree-lined path. The maples were green with new spring growth. Below them, all the way to the gate in the distance, a river of yellow, white, and green flowers flowed. Narcissus. Jacob's feet were in the present and continued on their way, and his mind was lagging behind the past. Please, Jake, let's do this. Daffodils are such happy flowers. This will make the house perfect. Jake hit a smile. Perfect was Grace's favorite word. But the driveway is so long, it will take thousands. True, but they will multiply, and every year they will look better and better. They will multiply with our happiness. Of course, he agreed. He always said yes to her. Jacob frowned at the abundance of daffodils. She lied. She said they were happy flowers. And he wasn't happy. Dinner consisted of a can of cold-baked beans, which he ate while sitting on the floor in his studio. Dessert is a handful of dried apples that have become tough from age and exposure to air. Their leathery consistency made Jacob's jaw work out well. He thought longingly of Grace's tender, juicy roast. Jacob tilted his head back and sniffed, imagining that he could smell his favorite meat roasting in a huge double oven. Pork with homemade applesauce. Baby, it's time for you to quit. Dinner is on the table, Grace whispered in his ear. Jacob started, turned his head and looked back. There was no one there, and certainly not Grace. She left a few months ago. Now Shelby was getting a roast from Grace to die for. Shelby? Who the hell is a guy with a name like Shelby? Jacob asked the empty room. A squalid, effeminate, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. An art collector who has more money than intelligence, that's who. Jacob snorted, remembering how he himself had described this effeminate man who had stolen his wife from him. A man of fast cars and even faster women. A banal, bored, exhausted millionaire. The irony was that she had met Shelby at Jake's last solo show. The bastard even bought one of Jake's canvases to impress her. Jake froze in place. He couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. No. His mind screamed silently. She was just as her name predicted, grace in motion. Even in silhouette, Jake knew the truth of what his mind was trying to deny. It was Grace. His Grace. Jake froze for a long time, pressing his hands to his stomach, witnessing his betrayal. A witness to his death. He looked up from the horror movie playing out in front of his eyes and looked at his hands. Jacob raised his hands to eye level. He shook his head for a moment. He was sure he had seen blood. His hand voluntarily grabbed the neck of a half-full bottle of Jack Daniels. She knew what he needed. The lips obeyed and obediently opened to accept and close around the wet hole. My throat protested, but my stomach welcomed the firewater. Jacob carefully placed the open bottle on the floor, carefully moving it a short distance away, and lay down on the floor. He rolled onto his side, assuming the fetal position. The studio floor was as good a place to sleep as any other. The sound of a chainsaw running nearby echoed in Jacob's head. He groaned both from the sound itself and from the realization that it was someone calling him on his cell phone. Why did he choose this tune as his ringtone? He wanted to go back to sleep, to beautiful, meaningless oblivion. And he certainly didn't want to talk to anyone. Not today. Not today. Not ever. The sound went on, growing louder. Jacob growled and rolled onto his back, reaching for his work pants. Glancing at the screen, he saw that it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. What the hell? Where did the day go? Hello, he barked into the phone. For God's sake, Jake, is that the way to answer the phone? I could be a potential buyer, his agent said. Jacob bristled at his abusive tone. My name is Jacob, Bart. What do you need? I'm busy. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. Hopefully, being busy means that you're going to tell me that you're okay with your show this summer. Jacob sat down, staring at the blank canvases that stared at him warningly from the opposite wall. Yes, great. Everything is fine and everything is going according to plan. My best job ever. Great. Let me know when I can come with a photographer to start cataloging them ahead of the exhibition. Yes. Sure. Jacob passed out. He looked at the bottle of JD and thought about returning to oblivion. Just as he was reaching for the bottle, the chainsaw started working again. He looked at the screen, Grace. Mentally, he decided to reject the call, but his finger pressed the accept button. Old habits are hard to give up. Jake? The soft hesitancy of her voice only angered Jacob. It was a lie. It was all a lie. He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. What do you want, Grace? I shit. Jacob heard her inhale noisily. Are you okay? Do you take care of yourself? Your voice sounds strange. You don't drink too much, do you? What the hell do you care? I care, Jake. I care. Well, I had a strange feeling that you needed me and that I should call. Jacob was not deceived. Her concern was a sham. Well, aren't you just the Mother Teresa of unfaithful wives, taking care of how the poor jerk you fucked feels? Jake, you have to stop verbally attacking me. You have to forget about what happened. We broke up at least a year before I met Shelby. Really? And you didn't think to tell me about it? It's funny that you were willing to continue living at my expense, sharing my bed and making love while we were… How did you put it so eloquently? Broke up? I just didn't know how to tell you. Well, I have to praise you for your original approach to discussing this topic. To catch you making love is, of course, to tell me in no uncertain terms what the status of our relationship is. Jake didn't know why he went back to the apartment. Perhaps he hoped that the visions of the previous evening had been a bad dream.
No lag.
What do you want, Grace? You. What do you want, Grace? A man's voice repeated, this time more firmly. Jake? Are you still here? Jacob shook his head, clearing his throat. Yes, I'm still here. Please stop. Please stop being rude to me. I still care about you. I'm calling because I care. Jacob ignored her request, knowing it was a sham. So, how's Shelby? He's not here right now. He's away on business. Oh, you better be careful, Grace. Maybe he's after some fresh married fool to seduce her. Maybe he's already tired of you. Or is it you? Are you bored? Jake, stop it. I know you just want to hurt me. I'm damn right. You deserve all those nasty words and more. Jacob was breathing heavily, as if he had run all the way up the driveway and back. I know you. I know you still care about me, Jake. Jacob was silent. Maybe I'll come over to your place, cook a nice dinner, and we'll talk about the divorce? Jacob laughed loudly and cynically. What are you going to do, Grace? Poison me so that you can take every last coin? Isn't it enough for you, you treacherous fool? Ripping out a man's heart isn't enough for you? And Grace, I don't love you. I hate you. He heard her sharp sigh, and some tiny, stubborn part of his soul wanted to apologize and comfort her, like when their puppy was run over by a truck because he accidentally didn't close the gate and she was heartbroken. But this feeling lasted only a moment, and it ended with memories of her parting words, so cruel and sarcastic, as she dragged her suitcase to the car. Ignorant weakling, I only married you because I knew you were going to be famous, loser. I need a man who can really use me, not someone who thinks I'm Dresden fucking porcelain, fool. I just wanted you to paint my famous portrait. Without saying another word, he hung up the phone, cutting off the echoes of the past. He shuffled into the dirty kitchen, pushing aside dirty cups and plates to make room on the bench. He took out a frozen loaf of bread from the freezer and, with some effort, cut 2 slices. He put them in the toaster, and while waiting for them to cook, he moved into the pantry and found peanut butter. The toaster beeped, and the smell of toasted bread made his stomach rumble in anticipation again. Jacob roughly spread the pasta on the bread. There was no butter. It ran out more than 3 weeks ago. He took a bite and returned to the pantry door with the toast in his hand. This was the moment when Old Mother Hubbard's buffet seemed plentiful. Jacob frowned in annoyance. Now he will not be able to avoid a trip to the city. Jacob's wreck seemed to be chewing its way into town and spitting it out through the anus. He used to enjoy its power. Not anymore. He didn't enjoy anything else at all. Well, at least something other than the total oblivion caused by JD. One by one he made stops. Post office, hardware store, supermarket. He was stocking up on everything he needed. Everyone looked at him with pity. Everyone except the cashier. She was flirting. Jacob ignored them all. No sooner had he climbed into the car after completing his last errand than the sound of a chainsaw sounded in his pocket. Lifting his ass off the seat and straightening his legs, Jacob was able to get his phone out of his pants pocket. He checked the screen. It was Grace. Jacob groaned, put his head down on the steering wheel and banged on it several times, deciding whether to answer or not. Eventually, he took the call. What do you want, Grace?
Jaka.
How are you? Fan-fucking-tastic. Aren't you going to ask how I am?
No.
I wish you would do it. I miss you. Jacob shook his head. Did she really think he believed her shit? Did she really think that he had forgotten her cruel taunts? Where's the lover? He has meetings all day today. Damn, isn't little Gracie getting enough attention? Doesn't a lover drop everything he does to satisfy all your needs? Like that last jerk you messed with? You know, the one who married you and who gave you everything. It's not fair and it's not true. Jacob was silent, knowing that she would not be able to resist trying to explain and justify herself once again. You haven't been around for the last 2 years. I've been there every day, Grace. I worked from home, if you remember. You could have been there physically, but mentally and emotionally you weren't there. Your head was full of art. There was no place for me. I was lonely. I needed someone. Now you're being unfair. About 3 years ago, I finally started getting a decent price for my paintings. Instead of selling the canvas for 2 or 5,000, I started getting 25,000 plus. And I didn't hear you complain when that success allowed us to buy a house, well, the one you called perfect, and an apartment in the city. No, you like that part of my success. And for someone who was so damn lonely, you hit it well. Each word was another twist of the knife plunged into Jake's heart. When was the last time she was so promiscuous with him? Jake, are you still here? Did you hear a word of what I said? No, and what's more, I don't want to. Jacob heard her voice warning him not to hang up when he pulled the phone away from his ear and ended the conversation. The aroma of supermarket-bought lasagna smelled good to Jacob. He checked the time, wishing it would pass faster so that he could eat a normal meal for the first time in a long time. 10 minutes before leaving, his phone rang, and the sound of a chainsaw broke the silence. Without looking at the screen, he realized who it was. Did she have to ruin everything?
Jaka.
It's me again. Yes. That's what I understood. What do you want now? I want to talk to you, baby. Jacob growled like a cornered animal. Her attempts to manipulate him infuriated him. Don't call me baby. I'm not your damn baby. I'm Jacob, the guy you dumped. You wouldn't be so upset with me, Jake, if you didn't still love me, Grace snapped, her mask slipping off. You're just jealous because there's another man in my bed right now, and you wish it was still you. Outside the train window, lush inland forests gave way to an increasingly dense urban suburb, but Jake did not notice all this. In truth, he avoided looking out the window, because instead of the scenery passing by, he saw only images of Grace making exactly love with another man. He didn't know why, and the pain of it was almost unbearable, but he still felt obligated to do it. He followed Grace. He kept hoping that he would witness her ending her affair, that he would hear her tell her lover that she loved her husband too much to continue. This time she said she was going to the city for the weekend. He decided to take the train and rent a car so as not to risk Grace recognizing his car. He parked on the opposite side of the narrow street from Shelby Holborn's mini-mansion in the trendy suburb of Paddington and waited. He knew that Grace would have easily overtaken him to the city. The train was traveling much slower than her little sports Lexus. He had already visited their apartment in Bondi and made sure that neither she nor her car were there. Jake decided that this meant that she intended to stay the night at her lover's house. Jake watched Holborn's neighbors return home, walk their dogs, drive off to an unknown destination, and generally go about their business, and while he waited, he was tormented by the question of her choice of lover. Her choice was insulting in itself. The guy was a spoiled, handsome guy.
Playboy.
Inherited wealth. Immediately after graduating from high school, he took a high position in the family firm. Everything was presented to him on a platter. What did Grace see in him? Did she honestly believe that he would change his habits for her? That he wouldn't get bored with her as much as all the other women he was courting? Jake may not have had the same level of wealth as Shelby Holborn, but his last 3 exhibitions have raised more than $750,000 each, and he is currently a prominent representative of the art world. The new Australian Brett Whiteley. On top of that, he was a self-made man. No one presented him with anything on a platter, and he wasn't petty, vain, or selfish. His patience was rewarded, although for Jake the reward was bittersweet. He was right, she was really going to stay the night at her lover's house. He was close enough to see that the slit of her cocktail dress almost reached her waist as she stepped out of Holborn's elegant Ferrari. The bastard didn't even have the manners to open the door for her. He was close enough to see that the neckline of almost the dress was so deep that there was no way she could put on a bra. Worse, he was close enough to overhear their conversation, which had obviously started in the car. Do you really think I can get that much if it comes to a divorce? Jake's jaw dropped in surprise. A divorce? Did she want to divorce him? He thought the decision would be his. He would have run into her. She would have begged for forgiveness, swore that she loved only him, and promised to end the affair, and he would have decided to forgive. It would be difficult and take time, but he would try for her sake. He loved her enough to give her a second chance. Yes, it's easy. I checked the value of both properties. You guys bought at the right time. Real estate prices have skyrocketed since then. And then you have dollars in the bank, his own art collection. Holborn paused significantly. Wow, I didn't even think about his work. Holborn laughed. They'll be worth even more when he dies. And of course, being still married to him, you will automatically inherit everything. But what if he doesn't kill himself before the divorce is final? You'll inherit his estate anyway, unless he changes his will, and even then you can challenge it. Good God, she wanted him dead. The fact that Grace had used the knowledge he had entrusted to her at the very beginning of their relationship to push him to the extreme was too much. What child wouldn't try to commit suicide after being told that he was the only surviving member of the family after a car accident? The last piece of Jake Morrissey is dead. Jake, can you at least answer me? I'm Jacob, and no, I can't answer you because I wasn't listening to you. Jacob sensed her anger and disappointment. Well, you'd better start listening. I'm getting impatient fast. You can't avoid me forever. I can try the good old student attempt. He smiled as the mask of her false sincerity fell off again. Well, then at least do it forever. Go upstairs, asshole, and save us from the divorce. Jacob laughed and hung up the phone. Jacob stood in front of the easel, and now the familiar disappointment was bursting out of his gut. Nothing. There is no it. Jacob hated Grace for depriving him of it, as well as for her betrayal, for her evil desires. He looked to the left, behind the workbench, out the window at the garden of her cottage. He often watched her when she was working in the garden. His last work was a semi-abstract depiction of her in various guises in the gardens surrounding their house. How could she say that he wasn't there mentally and emotionally when he had been following her around for 12 months, painting her, photographing her, painting pictures in her favorite gardens? She couldn't. Her words were lies, deliberate lies designed to poison his memories. A deliberate attempt to rewrite their history by making him look like a villain. And all this in order to justify her deception, her greed, a way to justify her infidelity. Jacob chuckled. She could lie to herself and everyone else as much as she wanted. He knew the truth. The truth was that she was a malignant cancerous tumor, a tumor growth in his life. A fantasy of destroying Grace played out in Jacob's head. He was looking at her garden, and as he looked at it, the colors seemed to become even more intense. The blues brighter, the yellows more radiant, the reds deeper and juicier like blood. Even the greenery has become greener, like moss on the forest floor. Euphoria spread through my veins, filling my heart, head, and fingertips. Soon, Jacob reached for a bottle of Jack Daniels and took a sip. The fiery water was intoxicatingly mixed with euphoria. Jacob checked his phone and smiled. 6 messages. He guessed who was calling. He took pleasure in thwarting her attempts to talk to him. He hoped her composure was crumbling as quickly as his sanity. He decided to reward himself. In the end, he went to the mailbox to get the mail. Maybe he wouldn't have read anything, just added a handful to the already huge collection that occupied the desk in the office. But the fact that he emptied the mailbox deserved recognition. He was sitting at the dining table, leaning back in an armchair and drinking coffee. He added JD to it and dialed the number to access his messages. "Hi, Jake. It's me. Please call me back, baby. I'm worried about you." Jacob snorted. Who was she thinking of fooling with her sweet words? No one, and certainly not his. Jacob waited for the standard voice to tell him the date and time of the second message left on his mobile. "Jake, it's me again. I know you're here. Please stop ignoring my calls. I need to talk to you. Call me back as soon as you receive this message." Jacob smiled at the hint of annoyance in her tone. Grace wasn't the most patient person, and Jacob knew better than anyone that she hated being ignored. While waiting for the third message, he took a sip of coffee. To his disappointment, it was Bart, his agent, who wanted to know how the work on the next show was progressing. Jacob frowned. "I'll have to call Leach back and calm his fears, otherwise Bart is just as likely to show up unannounced. And this is absolutely no good." "No, absolutely not." Another sip of coffee, another general introduction about the time and date of message number 4. "Jake, you ignorant jerk, you better damn well call me back, otherwise you're going to regret this. I will make your life a misery." Jacob was grinning from ear to ear. Damn, Grace looked upset. Now she was shouting her messages. And who was she calling an ignorant jerk? At least he always opened doors for her, brought home her favorite chocolates every time he went to town, and made her coffee every morning, which she sipped while still lying in bed, because she didn't like mornings. Did handsome Shelby do all this? Jacob thought not. Most likely, he was too busy following in the footsteps of his grandfather and dad and wondering what to spend his next million on to bother with such trivial considerations. He definitely didn't open the car doors for her, and he really liked calling her a cheater. Jacob shrugged his shoulders. Maybe she liked being treated like a cheap cheater. Maybe that's where he was wrong. Cherishing her and treating her with love and respect certainly didn't work. Message number 5 was a return to the cloying sweetness, a fervent apology full of affection and requests to call her. It was supposed to win her an Oscar. After receiving the last message, Jacob felt elated. He selected the number in the message service needed to repeat the message. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back, enjoying the jubilation. "That's it, Jake. My patience is at an end. No one will avoid me anymore. I'm going to the house, and you damn well better be there." Jacob chose the option to save the message. He refilled his coffee, added another portion of JD, and entered his studio. His gaze immediately went to the window. He put the phone to his ear and listened to Grace's last message. He smiled as he looked at her cottage garden. Soon, he promised the flowers, she would be home soon. Jacob heard the car before he saw it. He smiled as he ran out the back door and around the side of the house to Grace's cottage. Grabbing a weapon that he was sure Grace would appreciate, he found the hidden entrance to the garden's narrow zigzag path where every turn was artfully disguised and carefully made his way to the grassy center, where she had set up a low stone bench. She called it her secret garden, her secret place where you could think, read, or dream. Jacob went there to hide. Hiding behind a wall of bushes, Jacob admired how deftly Grace had arranged the garden. A large hill slowly rose in height, and various kinds of flowers were planted in tiers. At the time, she said it allowed her to grow more varieties by showing them off. The garden looked impenetrable. The upper row of gladioli concealed that there was a narrow but deep depression in the center of the mound. If Jacob had wanted to, he could have stood halfway up the slope of the ravine and gone unnoticed, and Jacob was 6'8". Instead, he made himself comfortable and waited. He listened to the car approaching. He recognized her as Grace's Lexus. The car stopped, in his opinion, right behind his car. The surprise was the sound of two car doors opening and closing. Interesting. Jacob wanted to take a look to make sure it was the handsome Shelby she had brought with her. If so, he could have killed two birds with one stone. He heard voices, too far away to make out the words, but clear enough to realize that one of them was male and the other female. Jacob smiled. He closed his eyes so as not to be distracted by the periphery and concentrated on the sounds that grew louder as they approached. "He should be here," Grace said. "His car is here. I'll check inside. Why don't you go around the house and see if he's anywhere outside?" "Of course, baby. I can't wait to see his face when he sees that I'm here with you." Jacob grinned. Handsome Shelby might well have seen more than he expected before the end of the day. Grace giggled. "You're so bad, honey. You like the bad, my little cheater." "Yes, I do. We are a couple created in heaven. Do you think my confrontation and ridicule of him will be enough to make him lose his temper?" Jacob shook his head at Holborn's arrogance. He could only assume that they thought he was in his studio and couldn't hear them. "I hope so. I'm so tired of pretending that I care. Do you have any idea how hard it is, day after day, year after year, to pretend that you are a pretty butterfly when in fact you are an eagle?" Jacob's lips curled at Grace's metaphor. She wasn't a majestic eagle. She was a hyena, a scavenger, ready to pounce on a corpse. "So who's the bad guy now?" Grace giggled again, repeating Holborn's words. "You like the bad stuff. That's why you love me. You and I are alike." And then Jacob heard the front door open. The walls muffled her voice, but he could make out that she was calling his name. He imagined her walking from room to room, and her frustration grows when she doesn't find him. "Yes, Jakey Poo." Jacob heard Shelby mutter. Come out, wherever you are." Shelby's snide, condescending tone didn't bother Jacob. He knew he would have the last laugh. He listened, hearing the doors open and close, Grace calling his name. There was a moment of silence, and Jacob wondered where she was. Shelby? Jacob got the answer. From the proximity and direction of her voice, Jacob realized that she was standing at his workbench and calling to him through the open studio window. "Yes, baby?" Shelby replied, judging by his footsteps. He was approaching from the back of the house. "Did you find him?"
No.
"I haven't checked that shed in the backyard yet. This is a pottery shed." There was a pause, and Jacob imagined Shelby's questioning look. The previous owner was a professional potter. There are 2 state-of-the-art stoves and an electric potter's wheel. He died, and we bought this place from his daughter. I take it he's not in the house? No, and you should have seen this place. It looks like he was hit by a bomb. I don't think he's washed the dishes or changed the bedclothes since I left. Empty Jack Daniels bottles are everywhere. The trash can is overflowing, and it stinks to heaven. Apparently, he has lost a lot. It may be even easier than we thought." Jacob noticed that Grace was speaking quite calmly. There was no worry in her voice. "Do you think he's already committed suicide?" "I don't know. Maybe," Grace replied thoughtfully. "Of course, he's been talking differently lately, and it's not like him to ignore my calls. Maybe I should check out the pottery shed." "Yes, You can, but I dare to look at the house again. Maybe he's hiding in the closet, under the bed, or somewhere else in the same stupid place. Okay, I'll meet you here at 5. Jacob's pulse quickened. My ears were ringing. It's almost time. He took a slow, deep breath to calm himself. Jacob stuffed the weapon into the back pocket of his work pants and moved back along the narrow path as quietly as possible, stopping in front of the entrance and crouching. He flinched as the weapon pressed against him and shifted his position slightly to ease the pressure. He counted down the minutes, anticipating how impatient he would be. The muscles in his thighs protested against the forced immobility, but he ignored the discomfort. He waited until Shelby was half a meter away from his hiding place. "Hey, lover boy, are you looking for me?" Jacob asked casually, getting up and leaving the garden. Shelby turned around, clearly surprised. He took a step back reflexively. "What the hell? Where?" Shelby paused. He shook his head, squared his shoulders, recovered himself, and took a step forward. "Well, look at you, Jakey boy. Aren't you a sight? Anyone would think you'd lost your wife." Jacob tilted his head to the side, as if perplexed. "Wow, I didn't know you were a clown. It must look good on your resume." "Careful, Jakey boy. You forget who's in charge here." "I'll tell you. It's not you. I already have your wife, and by the way, isn't she a sweet fool? There's too much of a woman for you. My advice is that women like Grace need a steady hand, not the love shit you showered on her." Shelby Holborn grinned maliciously. "And, Jakey boy, I must say that after my little trip to your hacienda, I decided that I really like the idea of a country house. Yes, I think I'll take it too." Jacob smiled. It was more like thinning lips, exposing teeth. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and wrapped his hand around the weapon in his back pocket. Holborn raised his hands, clenching them into fists, ready to fight. He was too slow. Jacob entered Shelby's personal space, which prevented Holborn from identifying Jacob's weapon without breaking eye contact, and Jacob was sure he wouldn't do that. It's a pity, Jacob thought. I wish his eyes reflected the realization of his imminent death. Oh well, you can't have everything. Jacob plunged a garden fork, with carefully sharpened teeth, into the soft flesh of Shelby's stomach. And she was soft. The guy should have spent more time doing abdominal exercises. With one hand, Jacob angled the fork upward, pushing hard, trying to pierce Shelby Holborn's heart. Apparently, the way to the man's heart really lay through his stomach. He would prefer to have his heart ripped out, would be more symmetrical, but he would have to have a piercing. With his other hand, he covered his mouth, stifling his screams. He stared into Holborn's eyes, enjoying the look of shocked horror. Holborn's hands clung to Jacob's arms, as if trying to hold him back. Jacob brought his face so close to Holborn's that their noses were almost touching. He gave him a deliberately insane look. "Get a fork, Holborn." Jacob laughed happily at the pun, and was sure that even Martin Riggs, Mel Gibson's character from the Lethal Weapon movie series, would have been pleased with his quick wit. "Shelby? Jake?" Grace's voice momentarily distracted Jacob from his joke. He looked over Holborn's shoulder and smiled at his wayward wife. "Hi, Grace. How nice of you to drop in on your lover." When Grace took a confused step forward, Jacob gave one last push. Holborn's last breath passed over his face. Jacob wrinkled his nose. This guy ate garlic recently. Jacob felt pressure on his wrist as Holborn's knees buckled. He took out a garden fork, and Holborn collapsed at his feet like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Grace looked from her lover to Jacob's hand. "Oh my God. Jake, what have you done?" "I thought it was obvious," Jacob replied, grinning. "I picked up a lover with a fork. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, so I stabbed him." "You're right. It's fun. It's a little messy, but yes, it's fun." "Oh my God. Oh my God," Grace repeated over and over, stepping away from him. Jacob walked around Holborn's motionless body. Grace took another step back. Jacob took another step forward. The faster Grace retreated, the faster Jacob moved forward. Grace shook her head, and Jacob nodded his head. And then she turned around and ran. Jacob gave chase. Adrenaline surged through his veins, and he realized what it was like to be a lion chasing a gazelle. It was intoxicating. He closed the gap by adjusting his grip on the garden fork. Running at full speed, He boomeranged the fork into Grace's legs and grinned as she fell face first onto the lawn a meter from the car. A moment later, Jacob was on top of her, turned her onto her back and straddled her, pinning her arms to her sides with his hips. He gripped it tightly, risking leaning to the side to get a garden fork. Lover boy said that you like rudeness, that you need a steady hand. Well, how do you like it, Grace? Jake, don't, please don't, she whimpered, clearly scared. I'm not Jake.
I'm Jakob.
What? Jake? Please don't hurt me. Do you love me? I know that you love me. Read my lips. My name is Jacob. I'm not Jake. Jake loved you, but I'm not. Oh God, how he loved you. You were a reason for him to breathe. And how did you repay his loyalty? Grace was sobbing, rolling her head from side to side. Jake, you're talking nonsense. Please listen to me. You're not this Jacob. You're Jake Morrissey. You are my husband, and you love me, just like I love you, how I've always loved you. I came here today to ask your forgiveness. Jacob laughed. Nice try. That's why you brought your lover with you. Was he going to apologize too? Yes, you loved Jake. Of course she did. That's why you've spent months trying to get him off balance. You tried to kill the guy who gave you everything. But even then, you and your lover didn't have the courage to do it yourself. You wanted Jake to do it for you. The guy who gave you the perfect house with the perfect garden. I tried to be the perfect husband and give you the perfect life. And what did you give him? You're Jake? You love me, she sobbed. No, I don't like it. When Jake looked into your eyes, do you know what he thought he saw? An angel. A sweet and perfect angel. You're Jake, not Jacob. Grace squirmed and twitched, trying to free herself, but Jacob was sitting on top of her like a cowboy at a rodeo, and his weight was too much for her to lose it. Do you want to know what I see when I look into your eyes? Grace whimpered, repeating her previous words with tears in her eyes. You're Jake, Jake Morrissey, and Jake is gentle and kind. Jake loves me. You're not Jacob. I see a cancerous tumor. And what do we do with malignant tumors? Like a jammed record, Grace was sobbing. You're Jake, Jake Morrissey, and you love me. We cut them out. That's what we do. With these words, Jacob pierced the deceitful eyes of cancer. Jacob whistled as he mixed Holborn's ashes with blood and bone fertilizer. Daffodils will be delighted with the upcoming feeding, just as Grace loved the cottage garden. The thought of Grace in the garden reminded Jacob that he needed to rearrange the watering machine. Mentally, he ticked the to-do list. Delete Grace's phone messages. Check. Take the Lexus to Sydney, wearing a disguise as Grace. Check it out. Sneak into a Sydney apartment and leave signed divorce papers. Check. Dispose of Grace and Holborn's phones along with the disguise. Check. With the help of a second disguise, take the train to check. Disposal of the second disguise. Check. Vacuum the inner surface of the furnaces. Check. Wash the inner surface of the ovens with bleach. Check. To clean the chimneys of the furnaces. Check. To make dishes for firing in the oven and use in artistic works. Check. Scatter the grass seeds around the killing zones. Fertilize and water. Check. Clean the house from top to bottom. Check. Take a shower. Shave and get a haircut. Check it out. To appear in the city again in a normal and healthy way is to check. It took 3 weeks before the police approached him with questions about the disappearance of his wife and Shelby Holborn. Jacob could do nothing to help them except confirm their affair. A week later, they returned with a search warrant. They even took small samples from the finished canvases to check if Jacob had mixed blood into the paint. Obviously, they didn't know anything about the colors. The blood will deteriorate over time and destroy the colors. Therefore, despite their best efforts, they found nothing. The case remained open. The epilogue. Bart was delighted with the paintings for Jacob's next exhibition and said they were his best works. He lyrically commented on Jacob's bright color scheme and the use of ceramic fragments, which give the canvases an almost three-dimensional appearance. He told Jacob that he would use words like kaleidoscope and quasi-mosaic in the exhibition's brochure. He didn't say it in so many words, but he made it clear to Jacob that his recent notoriety wouldn't hurt his sales. He even predicted that sales at the exhibition would exceed the millionth mark. Jacob was just happy that it was back. Oh, and the daffodils really liked the fertilizer from Holborn.